Hey everyone, Matt Baird here, host of the ATA podcast. Each month on the podcast, we bring you news and insights from the American Translators Association. Today, we're going to talk about the ATA webinar series. If you're an avid reader of the ATA news briefs, you've likely noted the news about upcoming and on-demand ATA webinars. But have you ever really checked them out? If not, you're missing out on a wealth of knowledge, and it's just a click away. The series now offers over 60, that's 60 online seminars, available on demand, which means, of course, anytime you'd like to take one. And new webinars are being added regularly. Nowadays, we benefit a lot from technology. The internet, the cloud. We tap into the digital world every day in our translation and interpreting work. It allows us to work from virtually anywhere. And it means we can learn from virtually anywhere too. The ATA webinar series is a 21st century tool that you can use to continue your education, to hone your skills, and keep pace with the profession. Joining me today to tell us all about the series, the past, the present, and the future, is Tkaczyk. Karen, thanks for joining me today. Let's start by telling our listeners who you are and how you are associated with the ATA webinar series.
Hi Matt, thanks for having me. Well, I'm Karen Tkaczyk. Macmillan's my middle name, and that's what I use for my business, my freelance translation business. I work French to English. I work into both US and UK English, and I'm a highly specialized technical translator. I have a background in chemistry, and that's what I translate, chemistry and relating science. So how did I get involved with the webinars? I've given a couple of webinars for ATA and some for other associations and providers. And after the Miami ATA conference earlier this year, I was asked if I would run the ATA webinars on an ongoing basis. I'm part of the professional development committee, and they asked me to take a look at it.
Let's get right into the basics, or let's get the basics out of the way for those who might not know what a webinar is. Why don't you tell us exactly what is a webinar?
Well, shorthand for web seminar. So technically speaking, a webinar has to have an audio component and a video component, and they're recorded, and you can watch. You can see them multiple times, and you watch. So it's something that you attend online. You register and log in an online venue, and you can listen to the presenter and watch a picture of their screen.
I'm sure a lot of our listeners have heard of other online classes. I'm sure you've heard of the MOOCs, the massive open online courses. How does a webinar differ from these other online classes?
Well, MOOCs, of which are great, also another great source of professional education, they usually involve watching videos that are pre-recorded by the academic giving the course, and then doing some homework and submitting that and interacting with other course participants in online forums. So it's an entirely different beast, an entirely different scenario. It's a different kind of professional development.
Okay, so a webinar, there's no assignments, there's no classes. It's a sort of almost like attending a presentation.
Exactly, like a one-off seminar, if you like. I mean, obviously they could come in a series. You could have a series of webinars, parts 1, 2, and 3, but yeah. That's the difference.
Okay. Tell me, what are the advantages of webinars?
Well, focusing on something specific, a particular skill or subject or something you want to learn in a short burst, usually an hour, with interaction with the trainer. And there's no travel, there's low cost. You do it from the comfort of your home office or your laptop in Starbucks or wherever you choose to be.
Okay. Are there any disadvantages?
Well, I think that most of us prefer in-person training when we can get it. We know that looking someone in the eye is better, but that's just not always possible for reasons of time or expense or logistics. And this is great when that's not possible, and it allows you to be taught by people who are on the other side of the world, and you know, obviously has advantages because it's virtual.
Yeah, taking advantage of technology today.
Right.
Let's talk specifically now about the ATA webinar series. When did it start and why?
Well, exactly what you just said, taking advantage of technology. Webinars in about 2010, Naomi de Moraes, who was on the ATA board at that time, took on webinars as a project. The technology had matured and become mainstream, so it made sense for ATA to look into it as a method of giving members access to continuing education all year long. So Naomi was the driver of the project.
Since 2010, the series has built up to now over 60 on-demand webinars on the ATA website. Tell us a little bit about what are some of the subjects that are being covered.
Well, it's really the full range of translation and interpreting subject matter. It's everything from note-taking for interpreters to how to use corpora to language-specific topics. There's a great Russian translation webinar on there. Paula Arturo, who's a lawyer, translator, she presented on negotiating translation contracts. There are lots of webinars from people who are advocates of treating translation and interpreting as businesses. My favourite ever, I've attended quite a few of the ATA webinars. My favourite is probably the one by Martin Cross on translating patents. He's an expert in the field. He's one of those people that we all look up to if we work in patents. And he gave a webinar, and it was fantastic. And it was great. It was a wonderful hour. I know that others really enjoyed one by Carolyn Yawn on proofreading earlier this year. So it's a whole range, and all the things you might expect to see at a translation and interpreting conference, just scattered throughout the year in 1 hour segments.
Interesting that a webinar on translating patents can be described as, fascinating. It doesn't necessarily sound like the most fascinating
topic. It takes
topic.
all types, doesn't it?
Yes, but it just goes to show you, and that's a great advertisement for the series just now, that if it might seem like a boring topic, but if you're interested, there are speakers out there in the ATA webinar series who are bringing these subjects to life and really can excite you for them. And
see, some of us get excited about patents routinely, not about that nice creative marketing stuff you like, Matt.
This is true. Speaking of the speakers, tell us a little bit about how the speakers are selected.
Well, usually they're ATA members or people whose ATA conference presentations have had very positive feedback. So the ATA is conscious that it wants to make sure that the speakers have a proven track record. We're not just going to give someone who doesn't have a good reputation, a slot. So like I said, it's mainly people who've spoken for ATA and done well, but it could be European translation and interpreting contacts, people that some ATA members see at events that are elsewhere in the world, and then recommend to say, okay, this person's never going to come to a conference in the States, but I'm sure they would do a webinar for you. So we've had some good results from that. And then the other source of speakers is when an ATA division, perhaps a language division, recommends someone that they know from the other country, if you like, other than the English-speaking country, and they recommend someone to headquarters.
Okay, so we're talking about top-notch experts in their field.
Well, that's the ideal, right? And so someone like Martin Cross, whom I mentioned, is a top-notch expert patent translator, or you might get someone like Judy Jenner, who's known for her business skills and or you might get an interpreter who's just known to be a top trainer in the interpreting field, teaching and note taking.
How often are new webinars coming online?
Well, ideally, we'd like to do 2 a month. We usually have been doing about 1 a month, just because that's all the proposals we have. We avoid summertime and the holiday season between Thanksgiving and New Year because attendance is very, very low, much lower then. So we do fewer and none at all in July and December, and we're trying to do 1 or 2 months every other month.
Now, there's an obvious educational benefit to a webinar and what we've talked about so far. Are there any other incentives for ATA members?
Well, there's continuing education points. All the webinars are approved for 1 ATA point, and some other, for instance, interpreting associations automatically approve. They accept ATA points for their continuing education requirements. So there's various credentials that you can get for attending. Some people use on their CVs, on their resumes, they have a list of the professional development they've done to show, attended the last 3 ATA conferences or the PROS conference or the ITI conference or whatever it may be. And some people might list webinars just showing, interest in professional development.
Okay, yeah, that's something that I hadn't even thought about, that you add that on. I mean, right under your further education.
Yeah, I have a section on mine that includes courses I've taken usually. So I have some MOOCs, for instance, in there. I haven't personally done webinars, but there's no reason why I couldn't. So yeah, I think it's just to show that I invest in myself, that kind of thing.
Yeah, that's important in our business. Freelancers need to show that they're keeping pace with their profession, that they're further educating themselves, specializing. It's very important to have those credentials, and it's a great marketing tool. Let's move on a little bit into the nuts and bolts of the ATA webinar series. Tell me where I can find them, first of all, on both the upcoming and the on-demand webinars.
It's the ATA website, so it's atanet.org/webinars. Everything is there. The both upcoming are at the top, and then as you scroll down, the on-demand ones that are available for purchase or free, for that matter. There are a number that are considered to be member served benefits that are free. They're all on that one web page. So atanet.org/webinars. You'd also hear about them in the news briefs, in the email. So let me get this right. All the webinars would be announced by a specific email broadcast, 1 or 2 broadcasts before the date. They would get a specific email announcement, if you like. And then they will also be in the news briefs, in the Chronicle Online, some of the online forums for the various divisions and things will post about the webinars. Everywhere that ATA is, they'll post about it on Facebook and Twitter and Google Plus and LinkedIn and everywhere, really. So as long as you're looking somewhere, you will likely get the information.
Yes, sounds like you've covered. No, really, sounds like you've covered all the channels, all of ATA's communication channels, which is important.
I think we're going to give the credit to that to Mary David at ATA headquarters, because she's in charge of the logistics of the webinars, and she handles all that, and it always goes out to all the places where ATA is.
Yeah, no, it's good to get it out and to extend the reach. So if any listeners out there, if you're following any of those channels, then keep an eye out for the upcoming seminars, because there might be advantages to attending the live seminar, which leads me into my next question for you, Karen. Are there any advantages? What are the advantages to actually attending a live webinar as opposed to waiting till it's available on demand and listening to the recording?
Yeah, right. Well, first of all, I find it's nice to feel that you're actually part of an audience instead of listening later by yourself. But more practically, you can submit your questions, your own personal questions for the live question and answer session. So you're going to feel much more part of the event. You might participate in polls. A lot of the speakers will have polls to try and get a feel for where their audience is in relation to what they're talking about. And you might see your answers, in real time compared with the other audience members. So you see how you fit into the audience. So you get your questions answered. Some speakers will provide contact information and invite you to ask follow-up questions afterwards. Or they may offer to answer any unanswered questions remaining in a blog post or in some other venue. They'll offer to send out a list if they've run out of time. If there's lots of questions, they'll offer to send out a list of remaining answers. There's one other, this doesn't relate to attending the live event, but one advantage of webinars over a lot of other things is that you can watch it over and over. When we attend a session at an ATA conference or something like that, sometimes some of them you just wish they'd been recorded. You could watch them over and over. They're so inspiring. Well, you can always do that with a webinar, however inspiring or normal it is. You can repeat those, so you can learn it over and over again while you have the recording. So that's an advantage over an in-person presentation. You can learn for longer.
Yeah, it sounds like the ideal situation would be to attend it live, be able to ask questions or take part in the polls, as you say, and then have the advantage of going back and watching it again if you want to sort of repeat it and be reminded of some of the things you learned 6 months later, for example.
Right. And some of the webinars are very dense. I remember watching one once it was a subject matter webinar for me, and it was a bioscience. So I'm strong in chemistry, but I try to keep up my biology because there's a lot of overlap in the work I do. And I remember attending a webinar by an immunologist, and it was way over my head. I needed to watch it 4 or 5 times, and then I had understood it. So it was just a classic example of something being really hard and me having a lot to learn.
That is a really great example of one of the key benefits of webinars. Now, how does one register, and what kind of equipment will a participant need?
Well, you click a link on any of these places we mentioned. If it comes through your email or you click the registration link and register as you would for any other matter. And all you need is a good internet connection and a headset or speakers. If you have a really old device, that might cause problems with the plugin. You might need a fairly recent Windows or Mac operating system would be of benefit. But you don't need a microphone or a webcam. You just need a headset or speakers so that you can listen.
Okay. How long is the typical webinar?
Yeah, they're usually an hour. So some of them will be 50 minutes plus questions. Some of them will be 60 minutes plus questions. And you just show up for what you want, though. If you come late, you miss the beginning, and then you might watch the beginning later on recorded, or if you have to leave early again, you'll get the link in your email a day or two later, and you can just watch the bits that you missed.
Now, you mentioned earlier, if you attend the live session, the live webinar, then you have the ability to ask questions and take part in polls. How does that work? Does it work like a classroom? Can you stop the speaker and raise your hand, so to speak, at any time?
Well, yes, you can raise your hand. There's a little hand icon that you can click on to show that you want attention. Yeah, there's a little hand. It is, in fact, raising your hand virtually. That would be for technical help, though. So that would be, if you click the hand, then you might expect immediate attention from the webinar organizers. They might be helping you because your sound wasn't working or something like that. You wouldn't be stopping the speaker. Everyone attending can type questions into the chat box at any time, and then periodically, often just once at the end, but it could be after, it could be in portions. Periodically, the presenter will stop and then we'll tackle all the questions that have come in. So the idea of raising your hand and stopping the speaker, everybody's muted. All attendees are muted. So because otherwise the background noise from people typing, tapping, to blowing their nose, to their dog barking becomes far too distracting. I'm sure you know when you record these podcasts.
Yes, very much so.
You can't have background noise. So attendees are always muted. So they're not going to be speaking to the presenter, but they're going to be typing their questions into their chat box. And then during the Q&A session, the speaker will answer as many as there's time for, and then often, if there's any left, often write up answers to them later.
Okay, that's actually
Did I answer that?
Yes.
I answered the question, right?
Yes, very, very well, and it all makes complete sense to me that it needs to run that way. Otherwise, it could get out of hand pretty quickly.
Certainly, it's a different. If you only have a few attendees, that'd be one thing. But often these webinars have 100 people, so you can imagine what it would be like if 100 people were raising their hands and even speaking if they weren't muted, and if they were asking questions and their dogs were barking, and you can imagine how quickly that gets out of hand.
Now, do the speakers send handouts in advance, or are there other visual aids besides what the participant sees on their screen?
There might be. So there's definitely a visual portion, because that's what it makes it a webinar and not a podcast, for instance. So it might be a PowerPoint presentation or a Prezi or any other method of conveying information. There might be handouts that are sent to attendees beforehand or afterwards. When I give a webinar, there's always a list of resources, because it's just everything that I refer to during the webinar. There might be, but it really depends on the presenter. It depends on the nature of the subject. Some subjects are there's obviously going to be a place for handouts and materials, and some don't lend themselves to that in the same way.
At the ATA's annual conference, presenters will often give attendees access to their slideshow after their presentation. Do webinar presenters, do they do the same thing?
Well, yes and no. Everyone gets access to the recording, so everyone can listen and view the slides again over and over as much as they like. So in that sense, yes, they have access to the slides. But do we send a PDF of the slides? Not usually. Okay. In a good presentation, slides don't usually tell the whole story. The slides should just be bullets or snippets that aren't worth much without the presenter's explanation, as we all know. So yes. ATA doesn't give out the slide presentation unless the speaker insists for some reason, if it has some specific purpose or that's useful for that case. But yes, they can watch them over and over again, so they effectively have them. They don't have them in a PDF format, if you like.
How much do webinars cost, and how do I pay for one?
They cost $45 for ATA members and $60 for non-members, and that includes the on-demand recording. That includes whether or not you show up at the time and the on-demand recording. And you pay in the same way you would pay for any other item you were purchasing online. When you register, you click a link and pay online.
Okay. Now, can a group register and watch a webinar together? So basically only pay once is kind of a way to save money?
Yeah, if you were all in one person's home or office and watching, you could certainly do that. There's no group registration rate or anything like that, and only the person who registered would get the continuing education point.
Okay, that's a good point to make
Right.
about the
Right.
continuing education points.
So it might be that an agency somewhere, somebody wants all their project managers to watch a certain webinar, and they can register and just pay once, and that's great. And they don't all need continuing education points for whatever reason. Yeah, that could certainly work. But most of the people registering are individual people registering at home and taking the continuing education point.
Okay, yeah, that's a good example as well. Okay, so I found a webinar I want to attend. I click on register, I sign up, I pay for it. We've gotten that far. What's the next step?
You'll get an email that includes a link to say join the webinar. And depending how far in advance of the webinar you have registered, you'll get one or two follow-up email reminders during the week before the webinar. So when it's time, you just click the link in one of those email messages and join. Now, if it's your first time, you might want to join about 15 minutes early. You might need a plugin if you've never attended one before. ATA uses a service called GoToWebinar, which is widely used, and it doesn't give attendees many technology glitches, but there's the same as any other plugin you need, where you need a moment to let it download and start up. So that would mean you were in GoToWebinar, if you like, and then it opens, the link that you received in the email is specific to the webinar you're attending, so it opens you up to join the right event.
Okay, yeah, GoToWebinar is really not a complicated process. It's similar to GoToMyMeeting or whatever that other app
Right.
is. I've had customers had meetings with customers using that service, and I believe it's very similar to GoToWebinar service.
Yeah, I use about 4 or 5 different ones of these, cloud-based plugins. The latest one I had to download was Blackboard, just another big online, forum's not the right word. I suppose it's a software tool, but anyway, yes, simple. That's what we're trying to say.
Yeah, it's important. You want to make it accessible. I think we've pretty much covered everything, but if listeners out there have any additional questions that we may have not covered so far in the podcast, who can they contact?
Well, the email address to use would be webinars with an S, webinars@atanet.org. And I would look at the ATA webinars page, the atanet.org/webinars, because that should have almost all the information you need. But yeah, you can get an answer by email too.
Okay. Now looking ahead a little bit, what's the future look like for the ATA webinar series?
This week we have a webinar on certification. Next week we have one coming up in a nice timely manner before the annual conference called Killer Networking Skills for Language Industry Professionals. By Yves Baudeux. So that's the immediate upcoming. And then we will probably take a break. We have planned to take a break because there's no point in, if we put a webinar on the week before the conference, a lot of people, they won't sell well. So we'll take a break, and then in January we'll have new ones coming up. Transitioning from classroom to career is the first one we have scheduled from January. So that would be for perhaps young graduates, masters in translation and that kind of thing. So we have that coming up. That's a good one to look forward to.
Yes, definitely some great topics to look forward to, and very relevant, considering the ATAs coming out or starting the new computerized certification exam, and
Yep.
like you said, with the ATA conference around the corner, 2 very relevant topics.
Right. We try to put. There are some topics that are obviously a good fit for a certain time of year. We might do something about. In January, we might have one that that fits people's normal January activities about goal setting or looking to the future or something like that. Like you just said, in October we've got one that hopefully helps people prepare for the conference, all that kind of thing. So yeah, we do our best, and and we try to provide things that ATA members want to hear.
Well, that pretty much wraps things up from my end. Is there anything else you'd like to share with our listeners today before we go?
The one thing that crosses my mind is that we're always looking for great speakers for webinars. For some reason, there are lots of speakers who do live training who don't want to present this way online in a webinar setting. Now, to be fair, a lot of people do find it much harder to train a computer screen standing, in their home office than they do a room full of people. It's the preparation would be the same as for in-person training, but giving a webinar is a different experience than giving in-person training. So we're always looking for new good speakers for the webinar program.
Well, then, anyone listening out there, if you've given a presentation in the past at the ATA conference or elsewhere, you have a topic you think will be interesting to fellow ATA members, fellow translators and interpreters, please do contact the ATA webinar series and let them know and help educate your colleagues. Well, Karen, I'd like to thank you so much for joining me today. It has been educational, that's for sure.
Well, thanks for having me, and I hope you'll attend one soon so that you see what it's all about.
I will. I definitely will. So, what did everyone think? Are you yearning for some e-learning? Well, just head on over to the ATA website, atanet.org. Click on Events and then Webinar Series. You'll find all the upcoming and on-demand webinars right on that page. Check them out. You can listen to one of the free webinars and get an idea of what it's all about. Thanks again for tuning in, everyone. See you next month. Hey, you're still here. Are you looking for more? Well, you can find previous episodes of the ATA podcast on iTunes and, drumroll please, also on Google Play. So you Android users out there, you can now listen in using podcast apps such as Pocket Casts. Now, if you're a first-time listener, you want to check out our past episodes. Really, there's some great topics for everybody. We've covered things like the all-new computerized ATA certification exam, the ATA Client Outreach Kit, and last month we talked about the ATA's 57th Annual Conference in San Francisco this coming November. You won't want to miss that one if you're planning to attend. And if you're still on the fence about it, you won't be afterward. Trust me. If you like what you heard today, do me a favor. Please leave a review before you go. We'd really appreciate it, and it really does help increase our exposure and help us continue to spread the word about the podcast. Tell your friends about us on Facebook, your Twitter followers, link to us from your website. It all helps. And by the way, in case you didn't know, ATA is on Facebook, Twitter, and LinkedIn, so be sure to connect with us there so that you stay in the know about upcoming webinars and other ATA news. Finally, is there something about ATA you would like to know more about? Well then, just let me know, and we'll look into it, maybe produce a future episode about it. Or just tell me what you think about the podcast. I'd really love to hear from you. Write to me at podcast@atanet.org. And now for the credits. Episode 8 was co-produced by Mary David and myself. Special thanks to Karen Tkaczyk for her help developing the questions, and a big thank you to our tech guru at ATA headquarters, Rashawn Poccarel, who got the podcast up on a new platform this month and got us up on Google Play, so that we're sure to reach all of you who prefer Android over iPhone.